Welcome to Delivering Miracles, a podcast to teach women like you tips and strategies on how you can have a safer pregnancy so you can bring home a healthy baby. I'm your host and your high-risk pregnancy expert, Parijat Deshpande. I can't wait to chat with you. As many of you know, my postpartum experience was really unusual. Having delivered my son so preterm, 24 weeks and 5 days, if you're not aware, I was back in pre-pregnancy clothes 2 weeks after delivery. There's no sign that I'd had a baby, and there's no sign that I'd had a baby from my body or in my arms because he was in the hospital for so long. But what was really challenging for me was recovery, the actual physical recovery, even though I hadn't been pregnant very long. So I hadn't gained very much weight, if at all. I don't know if I'd even, by the time I had been on bed rest, I don't think I even gained, I think I'd lost all the weight I'd gained from all the muscle mass that I'd lost. And everything else went to the baby, right? So it wasn't that recovery that was hard for me. It was literally the physical recovery of being able to stand up again after having been on bed rest for months, being able to climb the stairs again. I remember for almost an entire year, it was hard for me to squat if I dropped something on the floor, to squat down and pick it up without falling over. That's how weak I had become. And that became really my focus, is how to regain and rebuild my strength. Nowhere in my recovery process did anyone talk to me about my pelvic floor. To be really honest with you, I didn't even know what it was until more recently. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what its function was. I didn't know why it was important to pay attention to. I didn't know at all what I was supposed to do about it because I didn't know what it was. And I was so glad to have met this amazing human being on this earth who is so dedicated to educating women about pelvic floor health. Because you know what I did learn finally? If you don't take care of your pelvic floor, you are going to have lifelong health problems. What? If it's that serious, why is nobody telling you about it? I don't remember it coming up in my postpartum check. I don't remember it coming up when I was receiving support to rebuild my strength in my body. I don't remember my friends telling me about it. I don't remember my mom telling me about it. It's because nobody did, because nobody knows. And yet it is such a critical piece of our health. So that's why we're talking about it. We're talking everything you need to know about pelvic floor health with one of my favorite people on the planet, Catherine Middlebrooks. She is a yoga teacher, postpartum corrective exercise specialist, wife, mom, and the founder of BRB Yoga and the Heal Your Core with Yoga program. With the mind of a researcher and the heart of a yogi, Catherine geeks out on the science behind corrective exercise and helping moms like you restore your core strength so you can say yes to life again. Sign me up. She is currently taking yoga on the road, traveling the United States in an RV with her husband, Paul, and their 2 young children. She's amazing, and I cannot wait for you to listen in on this conversation. Welcome, Catherine. I'm so excited you're here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I am so excited to be here. I love whenever I get to talk to you. So this is such a treat.
I know. Likewise. Every time we talk, I just leave feeling rejuvenated and revived and just more hopeful about the world. So let's bring that to our listeners today. Before we get into this, because you have so much to share with us, I've learned so much from you. So we have a lot to cover. But before we even go there, how did you become interested in pelvic floor health? What brought you here?
Well, a lot of it was my own journey. That's typically how we end up where we end up. This was something that I struggled with personally. So I have 2 kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And when my oldest was born, I had a very healthy, easy pregnancy. She was born the day after her due date. It was a natural birth. It was very textbook. And I was cocky during my pregnancy, to be perfectly honest. I was active. I did yoga. I meditated. I did all the things right. And so I expected to bounce back really quickly after she was born because no one told me to expect otherwise, right? So after I was cleared for exercise at my 6-week check with my midwife, I started doing all the things that I had done before I got pregnant because that's what they told me I could do. So I started getting back into yoga. I was doing some running and basically not paying attention to the fact that my body was giving me all of these signs that my core, my pelvic floor were not up for the activities that I was asking it to do. So for me, really, when I realized that something was wrong was when I was like 9 months out from pregnancy. So like she had been out as long as she had been in, and I felt weaker than I had when she was born, basically. I couldn't sit upright because my core was so weak. I felt this constant heaviness in my pelvic floor, feeling like kind of stuff was falling out of me, just discomfort in my back, all of these issues. And I finally had to be like, okay, what I'm doing is not working. I'm not recovering, and I need to start looking into that. And so that's when I really dove in. I had been a yoga instructor for a really long time before that, but then I started diving into like, okay, well, why is it that the yoga that I'm doing isn't helping me heal? And I learned a lot about the fact that a lot of the things you do in yoga and regular exercise can actually keep your body from healing. So then I started learning, okay, well, what do I need to do instead? And that's what brought me to be certified as a postpartum corrective exercise specialist and really just absorb every piece of knowledge I could so that I could heal my own body. And then from that, just this realization that we are not serving our women who have had babies by throwing them back into the world at 6 weeks postpartum without giving them the tools that they need to heal their bodies properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we're going to get into that in a little more detail in just a second. But even before then, can you describe to us what is the pelvic floor exactly?
Sure. The pelvic floor is a set of muscles and it attaches to your pubic bone. So kind of right there around where your vagina is, and it goes back to your tailbone. And it literally is this sling of muscles that supports all of your insides. So it acts to hold your internal organs in. The muscles wrap in figure eights around all of the holes down there. So it allows you to stop the flow of urine and start the flow of urine, and the same with fecal matter. And it is responsible for all of that. And it also is responsible and connected to the muscles of the deep core. So often when those muscles aren't functioning, there's also some weakness in the abdominals as well.
I think thank you for explaining that, by the way, because nobody knows this. Nobody talks about this. I imagined when I'd heard the term pelvic floor, it's like, oh, it's just the bottom. Right. And that must be what it is. And it wasn't until you and I spoke, what was it, like a year and a half ago, where it didn't even occur to me, oh, of course it's connected much higher than that. And of course, if you have problems anywhere higher than that it's going to impact the pelvic floor as well. So if you have problems in your core, if your core muscles are weak, it's going to translate to pelvic floor and vice versa.
Yeah. Well, and I think that often that misconception comes because we tend to think of the Kegel as the end all be all of like pelvic floor exercise. And when you think about the way people typically talk about a Kegel, well, then they're just talking about those very specific sphincter muscles. And I always, for all my students, I like show them the visual, like, no, this muscle goes from the front of your body to the back of your body. Like it's huge. And when you think about engaging it, you don't just want to be engaging that one little part. You want to get that whole muscle in the game. Yeah.
The whole figure eight. Yeah. Okay, so you noticed signs that your pelvic floor is weak. And I think maybe because of the work you had already been doing, you were aware of that, but so many of us are not. So what are some like really obvious and then maybe not so obvious signs that your pelvic floor is probably weak?
Right. Well, so let me just make one distinction here because there's a lot of people who have issues because of weakness in their pelvic floor, but there's also a lot of people who have issues because of tightness in their pelvic floor. And it can be confusing because many of the symptoms overlap. So let me think about the best way. I'll talk about kind of weakness in general, but then we can talk about the overlap between them.
That would be great. Because I imagine those are they're distinct issues and they probably are addressed differently, right?
They are, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's start with weakness and then we can move over to tightness.
Yeah. So weakness in general will probably feel like a really good sign of weakness is if you try and put a tampon in and it doesn't stay in, right? Something that worked before you got pregnant and now it's like there's no muscles. Feeling a lack of sensation during intercourse just because those muscles are flaccid now. Like the muscles are not able to engage as tightly. There's less sensation. That feeling of heaviness in your pelvic floor. And it's something like if you don't know what I'm talking about, you probably don't have it. But if you have it, yeah.
Thank you for saying that because I can imagine all our listeners are like, oh, is that heavy? Is that happening right now?
Right. Is it heavy? Like, you know it. It's this feeling of like, there is something. It just feels like lower and heavier. And like it is this heaviness is the way to describe it. That is often a function of just the weakness in the muscles, unable to hold stuff up. So those tend to be the symptoms of weakness. Also things like incontinence. So peeing yourself when you're jumping on trampoline or sneezing, all of that can be caused by weakness.
You're saying all these things that I had heard. I didn't have too many friends who'd had babies before me, but I had enough. And they were all kind of talking about all these symptoms like, oh yeah, that happens after you have a baby. Like you're just going to pee yourself after you have a baby. That's just how it is. Or, oh yeah, you're like way looser down there. So intercourse, maybe it's a little bit better because now you're not so tight, but nah, it's just how it is. So you're saying that's not normal?
Right. No, it's not normal. It's a sign. So the distinction is it could be common, but not normal. So it is in our culture something that many women experience because we don't teach women how to properly rehabilitate those muscles. Whereas in countries like France, pelvic floor physiotherapy is just standard care after you have a baby. So people in France aren't talking about, well, I pee myself. No, because they are rehabilitated after they have a baby.
Oh my. I mean, it's making me angry to hear this. I mean, really, honestly, like, what are we doing? Oh my gosh, why is this not just standard? I don't get it. If it's not normal to feel this way, and yet basically everybody thinks it's normal because they all feel it. What is that? I'm like speechless. I'm so angry right now.
No, I mean, I feel the same way. I completely get fired up about this, especially because I see so many women who end up feeling crazy, right? Like they go to their doctor. Like I had one woman who had a lot of pain during intercourse, which is a symptom of an overly tight pelvic floor. And her doctor, like a medical professional, told her to drink more water before she had sex. I was like, I can't even go there. Like, let's just move on from that and find a new doctor because so this idea that like we just are not serving our women and that 6 week all clear for exercise rule, that especially I always get on my soapbox about this because that is one of the worst things that we can do for our postpartum women because to put the notion in a woman's head that at 6 weeks her body is capable and ready to do everything when the reality of the muscular changes that have happened in her body to allow for a pregnancy, they're still there, right? You just had the baby 6 weeks ago. You've probably been laying down for 6 weeks. You're then asking this body that's in a very compromised position to go do things that's just not ready to handle. And then often people who may have recovered just fine if they rested longer end up with issues because they did too much too soon.
Wow. I mean, I'm so glad we're talking about this and I want every woman in this country to be listening to this because you're basically saying we're getting wrong information from our OBs at our 6 week check.
Yeah, that feels controversial to say that, but it's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah. But it seems to be true, right? That they're not aware. I mean, if an OB thinks it's okay to say drink water before having intercourse, I mean, not all OBs know this stuff.
No, it's not. It's not a part of their training. I don't think they get the baby out, and that's their job. Yeah,
right. And I don't think they're trying. Right. Exactly. And I don't think they're intentionally misguiding you. But I think this is another for the listeners to really think about, who are you getting the information from? Because your OB knows how to help you stay pregnant, how to deliver safely for the most part. They don't know everything, but they know a lot. That's their job. But outside of that, you really want to go talk to a specialist who knows this far better than your OB does. The same reason why you go see an OB and not your general practitioner for pregnancy. You want to keep looking at specialists.
Yes, exactly.
Wow. Okay. So we've talked about pelvic floor weakness and the signs of pelvic floor weakness. And then you mentioned that tightness has a little bit of an overlap with this. Talk about pelvic floor tightness. What does that mean?
Yeah. So for a good number of people, the more I do this work, the more surprised I am by how many people actually have pelvic floor tightness. So the symptoms of pelvic floor tightness, well, let me just explain why that would happen, right? So in weakness, it kind of makes sense, right? You've had a baby, your core muscles got weaker, the pelvic floor was holding a lot of extra weight, that it gets tired, right? When a pelvic floor gets tight, there can be a number of reasons why that happens, but one main one is that as the core gets weaker, other parts of the body start compensating just to create stability and protect the spine and protect the pelvis, because we don't want these big bones moving around in our body. It's not safe for the spine. So when the core gets weak, sometimes the hip muscles and the pelvic floor muscles will kind of lock down just to try and keep that pelvis stable so that your spine is safe. So some symptoms that come along with that, as I mentioned, pain during intercourse. If it hurts after you have had a baby, I mean, of course, there's like the normal recovery time. It's going to hurt for a while if you had a vaginal birth. But if it's ongoing pain, odds are then you have tightness, feeling like you can't empty your bladder completely. So you like go to the bathroom, then you have to go to the bathroom really soon after. It's because your pelvic floor isn't releasing all of the fluid from your body. People who have a tight pelvic floor also often have feelings of hip discomfort in particular. So they will either have like SI joint stuff. Do you know SI? That's your sacroiliac joint. It's kind of in your low back where one side feels like it pops out. And because it's all related. So those are the main symptoms of tightness, and also feeling like you can't get a big breath in, because if that pelvic floor is holding tight, it actually will prevent your diaphragm from dropping down fully.
Wow, it's great to hear this, because those are really huge signs that I think many of us just live with. Again, similar to the weakness, we just kind of go, okay, and especially for women in pain, right? We just tend to go, okay, that's probably just...
Right, or maybe that's normal, because you don't know.
Right, exactly, because you don't know. You don't know.
And I will say the tightness often goes, this is also anecdotal, but it tends, in what I see, to go with people who are more type A personality. Like they just hold a level of tension in their body that is kind of chronic. And that's kind of the way they move through their life. And their pelvic floor reflects that. Right.
So then you really don't know. Right. Because then if that's just kind of how you go through life, then that's just...
Right. You're used to being just tense all the time.
Always how it's been.
Right.
Right. Like, of course, this is how it feels. Tightness is normal. Right. Okay. So pelvic floor weakness and tightness, is being pregnant and childbirth the only way for that to happen?
No, not at all. These things can happen in men as well. So men can have a weak pelvic floor. Yes. So these muscles, right, they're the base of our pelvis. So things that we do in our life can impact it. So the fact that we sit a lot, that in general makes us have weaker pelvic floors. So no, you can have these issues beforehand. Pregnancy can exacerbate them, but no, it's not only created by pregnancy.
So if you have them beforehand for whatever variety of reasons, can that impact the health of the pregnancy?
So it can definitely impact the way a delivery goes. So especially something like a tight pelvic floor, if you are holding that pelvic floor really tight and then you go to deliver your baby, that can create a failure to progress, right? Your brain is not able to let those muscles relax and dilate to the point where it needs to get to deliver.
Absolutely.
And I don't know really about how the impact of a weak pelvic floor would be on pregnancy, but I would imagine, because if you have a really weak core, and so it's probably the same for the pelvic floor, then it can prevent the baby from getting in the right position. It's almost like they have too much room to move around in there. And so they're not being pushed into the right position. So that may be something that contributes to a baby being breech or some other less than ideal position for childbirth.
Right. Wow, that makes a lot of sense. I'd be very curious to learn more about that because I imagine, especially if you have been through any type of trauma, infertility, losses, or anything like that, that you would unconsciously, your body would hold on to those muscles tighter during pregnancy. And I imagine that that would really play a big role in terms of the stress response, which knows the work that I do, and just feed into that and just create this feedback loop of tight muscles, stress response on, tight muscles, stress response on.
Absolutely. I think more than most any other muscle in the body, the pelvic floor is so prone to responding to stress. I mean, now that I have been working on this for so long, I can literally I can lay down, this is going to sound a little bit woo-woo, but I can lay down and think of words and feel the response in my pelvic floor. So if I think stressful words, I can feel those muscles tense up.
Yes.
Because obviously, I mean, if you think about evolutionarily, those muscles are designed to keep you safe. And if you're in a stressful situation, you're going to want those muscles to close up, right? So yes, it's very, very tight. And I think it absolutely can have a feedback loop effect.
Oh, yeah. Amazing. Wow. This is so eye-opening. A lot of our listeners struggle to get pregnant. And one of the big reasons for that is endometriosis. Can you talk a little bit about endometriosis and pelvic floor health?
That is something that I am not really familiar with. So I do not think I should speak to that because I just don't know the relationship.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And we can
absolutely
delve into that in another episode, probably separately. Can you speak to pelvic adhesions, maybe for after surgery or anything when you develop scar tissue in the pelvis and how that affects pelvic floor health?
Yeah. So scar tissue in general, both in the pelvic floor and in the core, can have such a huge impact because it's this living organism, scar tissue. So it is almost constantly growing and moving, and it can dive down deep into deeper layers of the muscle. So whenever there is scar tissue that gets kind of locked down, it can no longer move freely. That is an indication that the deeper layers of muscles around that scar are also probably not functioning well. And so, for people who have C-sections, C-section scar massage is something that's really recommended in terms of core healing because you want to keep that scar loose and mobile so that it doesn't prevent the whole muscular sheath from firing differently.
And I wonder if that's true for even laparoscopic procedures, because I'm thinking back to our listeners who have endometriosis and often have surgery. If maybe after surgery, we should be teaching women to continue to massage the incision point.
Yeah, I think that in general, it's probably a good idea. I believe that laparoscopic is probably the best of the surgeries you could have. It's the least invasive. But in general, you always want that scar tissue to be mobile because otherwise it will be impacting the other muscles. There's research that shows that a C-section scar massage can change the way your shoulder muscles are firing. That is how connected the whole system is. You want to keep all of those scars moving.
Absolutely. And for those of you that are listening and want to know more about that, Catherine and I did a video interview a little while back, actually, where she demonstrated what a C-section scar massage would look like. And that's going to be linked in the show notes below, so you can check that out as well. Speaking of shoulders, okay, so it's been a while now, I started myofascial release therapy for pelvic pain. And it's so interesting because we found the connection between pelvic pain and shoulder pain. And so when you said that just now, I just like smiled so huge because I'm like, yes, I totally get it. And I was so fascinated to see. I mean, obviously we know our body's connected. Otherwise, it would be just a bunch of separate moving parts going in all different directions. But I don't think we really understand, most of us at least, how connected our bodies are, just how deeply connected we are. And so can you talk to us a little bit about that connection of this upper body connected to our pelvis?
Yes, this is one of my favorite topics. I will gladly. Yes. So as you say, it's all connected. And when you are pregnant, as I mentioned before, as your core gets weaker, often also the pelvic floor gets weaker, other muscles kick in to start protecting the spine. So in general, that looks like the muscles of the back get tighter. Some hip flexors get tighter. So a muscle called the psoas, which actually connects to the spine and then wraps around to the front and connects in your inner thigh. That one gets really tight. And when that happens, when the psoas gets tighter and the back gets tighter, it ends up kind of shooting your ribs forward a little bit. And the diaphragm, I'm going somewhere with this. I know this is a lot of body parts that I'm throwing out, but the diaphragm attaches to the rib cage. So whenever the back of your body is pushing your ribs forward, it changes the way your diaphragm is working. And that's the big muscle that drops down into the belly when you take a big breath in, right? It helps you get a big full breath. So the diaphragm and the pelvic floor work in tandem. They are connected. So we actually have 3 diaphragms in our body. The pelvic floor is one, the actual diaphragm is a second, and then the third is actually your glottis at the back of your throat. So if the tight back has made your diaphragm stop working as well, that means your pelvic floor is going to be working less effectively too.
So if that's not working, then your pelvic floor is likely to be tight?
It could go either way. It's very complicated. But basically what happens is when your diaphragm isn't working, when it is working and you take a big breath in, the diaphragm drops down, the pelvic floor relaxes and drops down. And that sets it up to contract effectively on the exhale. So when you breathe out, then the diaphragm lifts up, the pelvic floor lifts up. They work together, they contract together. When the diaphragm isn't working, what that may mean is that it could be tight because you're not getting that good inhale. So the pelvic floor never fully relaxes. So that's one thing that could happen. So it's kind of living in this chronically tense state, which means it can't engage fully either. I also realized just now, I totally forgot to say that if your pelvic floor is tight, you also will be leaking. Did I say that? I may have said that.
No, you didn't, but that's interesting to know. So because you did mention there was an overlap in symptoms, so you can't quite always know the cause, but...
Right. And that's the main overlap where people get confused. Like they think they have a weak one, but it's actually tight. Right. So yeah, if the diaphragm can't drop down fully, then the pelvic floor may never be relaxing. But the other thing too is if the diaphragm isn't working properly, then often the core gets really weak as well. And so then the pelvic floor may be weak too. So it could go either way.
Well, and my thoughts also, sorry to interrupt, but my thoughts are also going as I'm hearing you say this, to the stress response again. And if you're not breathing deeply, your stress response is going to be on.
Exactly.
And it cannot turn off until you get enough deep breaths in.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And then that also related to the shoulder, right? So if your diaphragm isn't working well, instead of breathing into the ribs, which is how we're made to breathe, we end up lifting our shoulders up and down and taking these really shallow breaths. Or we just send all the breath into our belly, and our belly is like going out constantly, which weakens the belly. But if you're lifting your shoulders, then you're going to have a ton of tension that you're holding in your upper back and your neck, all because you're not breathing properly. But then it's going to show up as pelvic floor issues or pelvic pain and shoulder pain. Like that is starting from the diaphragm, but it's impacting all of these other issues.
Wow. All these other places, right? And then pain gets worse because the stress hormones are coursing through your body. So the pain that's coming from this tightness or the weakness is then made worse. by the fact that your body just cannot relax and
and that's why one of the things
stress
that
response.
I
So it's
always recommend to,
wow.
I mean, really, it's great for everyone, but especially women that are dealing with pelvic floor stuff is meditation, because you've got to get the stress down. You've got to get your body, you've got to get your parasympathetic nervous system on so that you can breathe well, because that literally just makes all the other muscles work properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about a lot of big things, and I'd love to switch gears and talk about what our listeners can do, because I imagine a lot of them are hearing this going, oh my gosh, I had no idea that could be what's happening. So I'm wondering if we can split it by kind of phase, if we can start with women who are not yet pregnant, but either feel like they have some pelvic floor issues, and then move on to pregnancy and then postpartum. If you can give like your number one tip for each of these women, what do you think?
Yeah. So if you're not yet pregnant but you feel like you have some pelvic floor issues, it would be great to address them now. So I will say for all of these 3 phases, one of the best things, like first steps you can do if you have access to it, is visit a pelvic floor physiotherapist, because more so than any sort of external evaluation, they would actually be able to go in and manually check what's happening with those muscles, what's tight, what's weak. And because sometimes you have a combination, right? And so that can be hard to know unless you actually see a professional. So always, that's like, everybody should just go see one. Let's all go see a physiotherapist.
Yes. Is there a database or someplace we can go to find somebody, or how do you recommend our listeners find someone?
Not that I know of. I wish that there was. The way that I have typically done it with my students is because my students are all over. And so I kind of just say, like, you've got to Google and see who is really specifically pelvic floor physiotherapy. And you want someone who will do manual assessment. So sometimes physiotherapists will not actually like stick their finger inside of you to feel around what's going on. You want someone that will actually be doing that manual work, because not only will they be able to tell, they can actually release muscles manually as well, which can be very effective. Yeah. So that would be for people who are not yet pregnant. I think just doing that, and then also getting a sense of, even if you can't do that, getting a sense of, well, is it weakness or tightness that I'm dealing with? Because then the approach is going to be different. So if it is weakness, then Kegels are a really great thing to do. Research shows Kegels are effective. People can be taught very easily how to Kegel, and it will increase the muscle tone of the pelvic floor. If it's a tightness issue, you don't really want to be doing Kegels because they're already tight. You don't need to tighten those muscles anymore. So then you really want to start focusing on deep breathing, getting big full breaths into the ribs, feeling the pelvic floor drop down on the inhale. And you can even help that along by laying in a position called Happy Baby. Do you know Happy Baby pose?
I don't, but it sounds so pleasant.
It is. It has 2 names, Happy Baby or Dead Bug. So if you're optimistic, you can go with one.
Oh God. Let's go with Happy Baby.
But you lay on your back, and you lay on your back, you take your legs up, and you just grab the top, it's actually the bottom of your feet. And you just pull your feet down and open your legs up wide so your knees are bent. And that position opens the pelvic floor.
Sure.
And then when you start breathing into it, it's like a double whammy. You basically are now opening them from the stretch and then breathing into that already stretched muscle.
Interesting. So I'm picturing kind of like the position you might be in when you're giving birth.
Except you're like flat on your back. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a little different. You're really relaxing into it rather than just like, yeah. Yeah, you don't have your back upright at all. Your head is on the floor. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Right. But in terms of your legs, they're similar, just opening up the pelvis.
Yes, they are. So that would be if you are not pregnant yet. And then during pregnancy, as much as possible, you want to try and keep the back from locking up. So we just talked about how, right, when the core gets weak, the back muscles get really tight. And that starts this whole chain reaction of the diaphragm not working, the pelvic floor, all that stuff. So during pregnancy, it can be really, really helpful to spend some concentrated time opening the mid back. And there's many ways you can do this, but really one of the simplest ways is laying on the floor, rolling onto one side, and then opening that top arm up to the other direction. So it's just like a simple laying down twist on your back and really breathing into the ribs in that position, just to keep that mid back moving so that it doesn't lock up during pregnancy. That will help both tight and weak pelvic floors stay as healthy as they can be, knowing they're going to have some impact when you're pregnant.
Sure, absolutely. And how about postpartum once the baby's here?
Yes. So once the baby is here, you want to, honestly, many of these tips apply regardless of what stage you're in. But once the baby is here, you want to make sure that you approach this period with mindfulness. So even though your doctor says go do anything at 6 weeks, don't. Take those first 4 months at least to really allow the body to rest. So low impact activity, focused on getting really good breathing back, focused on opening up the muscles of the back that got tighter, and also re-strengthening those core muscles, which will help the pelvic floor get stronger as well. That is kind of the best thing you can do for those first 4 months. And really, if you're breastfeeding, you would want to stay with that low impact approach until you are no longer breastfeeding regularly throughout the day, because your hormones stay elevated. All of your joints stay loose until you stop that breastfeeding.
Wow. So for some of our listeners who are breastfeeding for, say, a year, 2 years,
right,
you're saying they should stay with low impact activity, so like no running until they're done breastfeeding?
So that would be the conservative approach. I struggle with that recommendation because I think that it's somewhat unrealistic to ask people to not run for 2 years. But
yeah, it's a long time.
So the approach that I say is during those first 4 months, yes, don't do that stuff. Don't do it. Like, just protect your body in those first 4 months. And then if you are going to be doing extended breastfeeding or something like that, which I did, I breastfed for basically like 5 years total. And I did not, and I did these activities during that time because I love to move and I couldn't imagine not. So the approach then is that you want to, again, be really mindful. So when you start back into more intense activities, don't go run 3 miles on your first day. Go and run for like a minute and then walk for a minute, right? So that you are slowly allowing your body to reacclimate to these movements, but also you are slowly building up the strength. Because your body, if you give your body the chance to rest in between these shorter intervals of high intense activity, then the muscles will be better able to handle that load, once you get onto the next interval of it, because they've had that rest period. So that's what I always say. Like, if you're going to run, do run walk intervals and then pay attention to how you feel afterwards. Do you feel heavy in your pelvic floor? Do you feel like your back is killing you? Well, those are signs that you have now done too much too soon. And I think that is a message that we don't give to women enough, that like,
no, we don't.
You are the best judge of whether or not something is right for you. And the symptoms of pain, discomfort, heaviness, those are all things. That's your body's way of trying to tell you you're not ready for this yet. So you need to go slower.
Right. And I imagine that's hard to hear when all you want to do is get back into shape. Or in my case, it wasn't necessarily shape. It was just I needed to be at the hospital 13, 14 hours a day. And it's really hard to hear, no, you actually need to slow down and do this much more slowly.
Yes, it is. It's a very hard, it is a very hard pill to swallow for many. And I try to frame it as we're so eager to get back to normalcy, despite the fact that we are in a phase that is anything but normal for our lives,
Right. Absolutely.
And I think culturally, if we could start accepting that this stage and phase of womanhood is one where you do things differently, knowing that you're doing things differently so that, 3 years from now, when you're out of this very specific phase, your body can handle everything. Does that make sense?
Right. It does make sense. It's a really nice reframe to remind us that it is temporary, but that in that temporary phase, we do have to make adjustments. And they're a lot bigger than the ones we're generally being told how to make. But it is temporary.
Yeah, I had a woman in one of my courses recently, and she wrote this comment, and it was like, so she wrote the comment, and then she put a comment below it that was to clarify, and she was like, and just so you know, I'm 11 months postpartum, so not recently postpartum. And I was like, hold up. Let's
No.
That's
yes, very recent.
Yes, you are. That's the thing, is that like she believed she should be out of all of these issues. She believed that her body should be ready because she was feeling like really loosey-goosey in her joints, and she was still breastfeeding and all that. And that was where I said, I only now am really realizing this because my youngest is 3.5. So it's been like a year that I haven't been nursing. And only just now am I feeling like, okay, yeah, I actually will be able to get just as strong as I was beforehand. Because I didn't believe that the breastfeeding hormones could have that big of an impact for that long, which is crazy. Of course they can. You're making milk out of your body.
Right.
But like
it's sustenance to keep somebody alive.
Exactly.
That takes a lot out of your body.
Yeah. So just recognizing that it feels long when you're in it, but in the scope of your total life, it is short. And if you honor that period, you then will be able to do all your activities for longer in the future because you won't be suffering the physical consequences.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Gosh, there's so much good stuff that you said. It was just like filled with gems, this episode. I love it. I love it. For all of you that are listening, whether you're trying to get pregnant, you are pregnant, or you are postpartum, which goes on for a long time, that postpartum period.
It's forever. I always say it's forever.
It really is, actually. If you think about it, you
is.
are different afterwards. You may be able to go back to a similar shape. You might be able to start working out similarly, but inherently the body's different.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a little bit different. And for all of you that are listening, wherever you are in your family building journey, please remember that your whole body is so deeply connected. And even if you think that you have pelvic floor issues, or you think you have pain or discomfort anywhere else, don't forget to look at your pelvic floor because it's a huge, huge piece of the puzzle in maintaining a healthy body as you're trying to get pregnant, stay pregnant, and then take care of the baby at home. Catherine, we could talk about this forever. We really grazed over a lot of concepts. I would love to know as we close this out, what are your final words of hope for women who are listening to this going, oh my gosh, I need to pay attention to my pelvic floor now?
Yeah, well, it is just that hope. I meet so many women who are so young, but have had, a couple pregnancies and just feel like this is the rest of their life, that the pain, discomfort, they fear doing activities that they once loved because they're either in pain afterward or their body can't stand up to it, or they can't, pick up their kids because of these issues. And so if that is any of your listeners, which I'm sure it is, because these people are everywhere, is hope that this is not normal and you don't need to live in this reality forever. You can rehabilitate the body and get back to all of those things that you love doing.
I love that. And I think that's such a crucial piece because our bodies are always looking to heal and restore and get back to optimal functioning. And so if we just pay attention to our body signals and say, okay, I need some specialized support right now, long term, this is just phenomenal for you and your family.
Oh my gosh, yes. It is.
Oh my gosh. So where can people find you if they want to know more about you, what you do, if they want to work with you?
Mm-hmm. You can find me at brbyoga.com or on Facebook at facebook.com/brbyoga. both those places.
Awesome. This was amazing. Thank you, Catherine, for being here. This was so eye-opening. I know you have changed our listeners' view of their bodies and what's possible and how to just improve their health long-term, which is so, so good. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Parijat, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Absolutely. You know it. Oh my gosh, I have like so many thoughts swirling through my head. I have so many feelings. I wish this was more well-known. And so if you've made it this far into the episode, I am so glad that you did, because this is information that is life-changing for you and your family. Imagine living a life without pain, without discomfort, without peeing yourself, without any of that, because it's possible. It's so, so possible. And that's the thing, when I first met Catherine, that was the thing that really stood out above anything else, above any other piece of gold that she shared with me. It was that these symptoms are not normal. They're extremely common, but they're not normal. And that there's something you can do about it. Our bodies are so closely tied together. They're so deeply connected. So whether you are trying to get pregnant, you are pregnant, or you've already delivered the baby, don't forget to pay attention to your pelvic floor, because it's a big piece of the puzzle in terms of maintaining optimal health for you now and long term. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I would love it if you can head over to iTunes by Apple Podcasts and leave a review and subscribe, so more and more women can hear about delivering miracles and can tune in for information like this that isn't readily available, but is so critical for our health now and long term. And if you haven't checked it out yet, you've got to check out Pregnancy Brain. It's so closely tied to everything we talked about today, because when the stress response is high, you're not breathing well. When you're not breathing well, see how many different parts of your body are affected by that? It's so important. And that stress response can be triggered by so many different things. We talk about it all in the book: grief, guilt, anxiety, worry, insomnia, pain, all of it. Check it out at pregnancybrainbook.com. Also, I would love to say hi. So follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, and Facebook at Parijat Desh. That's Parijatdesh. And really, say hi. I would really, really love to hear from you. Our bodies are extremely powerful things. So powerful, and they are always looking to heal. We've just got to pay attention, listen to those signs, and get specialized support. Just because your friend, your mom, your neighbor, or your doctor says there's nothing you can do does not mean there's nothing you can do. Find that specialist. Take care of your health, because your body and your family will thank you for it. Take it one day, one step at a time. You can do this.